Christine Milne, welcome to our coverage.
Thank you.
Is there anything apart from the fuel excise indexation that you are prepared to vote for?
Well, no, because what we've got here is a very backward-looking budget. It doesn't address the big issues facing the country. It's actually brutal in what it does to people. It makes life a lot harder for people. The big hit is on younger people in particular, but also the whole medical scene is awful. The co-payments, not only for going to the doctor, but for having your prescription filled, for a blood test or an X-ray, you know, it just goes on and on.
But a lot of that money does go into what will be a very large fund for medical research. Is that at least a benefit from some of the pain? Look,
I love medical research, but it's a complete con job the way this is being sold, because they're going to take $10 billion in the Ford estimates out of health funding and out of the pockets of the community to pay for health. And in return, this medical fund will put $275 million in. So let me say that again, $9.75 billion out and $250 million in. That is not fair by any means, and I don't think the Australian community is going to like the Parliament being blackmailed saying you can have cancer research sometime in the future, providing people have to pay and states have to pick up the hospital bills now. It just isn't right. But the other thing is, you know, all this talk about a budget emergency and burden sharing, one group of people are not bearing any cost at all, and that's the big end of town who've essentially written this budget. For the Gina Rineharts of this world, it is laughing all the way to the bank. They keep their fossil fuel subsidies. In fact, they get a new one. We're putting another $100 million into a new digging holes in the ground strategy.
But in the end, isn't it the private sector that, if the economy grows, will create jobs that will help alleviate some of the pain felt by those who can't find them now?
But they're axing all the innovation and the whole way the future should be looking. There's the word environment or climate change wasn't mentioned in the budget speech. They have axed the Million Solar Roofs program, they've axed the renewable energy program, they have killed land care, for example. Everything that's to do with sustainability or huge opportunity for Australia in renewable energy, new jobs, new infrastructure is gone, and it's a back to the past with roads funding, for example, when we should be looking at rail, urban transport, public transport. This is just awful.
Are you prepared to negotiate on any of the things you don't like now to see them introduced, but perhaps have their impacts softened?
Well, we've certainly, we're pleased that the fuel excise, for example, is going to come through as a piece of legislation, which means we will amend it to have that money go to public transport. We're not going to have it wasted on the East-West link, for example, in Melbourne. So we'll certainly be using our position in the Senate to vote against things like the co-payments, to put that money into public transport. But it is a real tragedy when you look at the opportunity cost to the nation of massively hitting students and young people and depriving them of the jobs in the new economy, and instead saying, here, we've got some shovels, go and dig roads.
There is though some give in some of those programs. Some of the increased university fees will have to be put into scholarships for the disadvantaged. So there are some things the government can point to, aren't there, that are positives?
Well, they are tiny in the scheme of things. They're taking away help for apprentices, for example, and shifting them onto a HECS-type program, and they're increasing the interest rate on HECS. So students are going to pay big time for this. But in rural and regional Australia in particular, you know, there just aren't the jobs for young people. So telling people they cannot go on to New Start and they have to stay on youth allowance, that is going to be an impossible situation for some of those young people, and telling them they have to move interstate, they're just not going to be able to afford it. This is a recipe for homelessness and more poverty for youth, and kids are not going to have a better life under this budget. It is last century's budget.
Finally, in the Senate equation, after the Senate changes in July, the government can bypass the Greens, can't it, in the search for the votes it needs?
Well, the government will have to negotiate the votes it needs, but I certainly do not accept there is a budget emergency, and the Treasurer brazenly boasted tonight about the fact they had proactively foregone revenue from carbon pricing, from the mining tax. They had chosen to let them off the hook and let the big polluters off the hook. Why would we put the burden onto the community when we want to see those resource-based industries actually put some money in to set us up for the education innovation we need in the future?
I'll have to leave it there. Christine Milne, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Lyndal.